Welcome everybody to Learn Lifelong Education and Aging Resource Network. I'm Dee Childers with Life Changes Elder Care, as well as the Vice President and Community Education Director for Learn. And today we are so pleased to talk about prevention and treatment of dementia with our speaker, Eric Collette from A Mind for All Seasons. So Learn is a network. It's an Idaho-based nonprofit organization with a mission to provide community education on aging and caregiving topics, and particularly free education. And we are part of the Leaders Network, is a part of the Society for Certified Senior Advisors. And it is an organization that educates and certifies professionals who work with seniors. Just as a disclaimer, this content is provided for general information purposes only and is not to be considered legal, financial, or health advice. Please consult with your providers before taking action based on this information. So today our sponsors are Oasis Senior Advisors, and their contact information is listed here on the slide. They have been a sponsor for this quarter and for next quarter, which is wonderful, as well as key members of Learn organization, as well as A Mind for All Seasons. So thank you, Eric, for not only sponsoring this quarter, as well as being a speaker today.
You're welcome.
And so Eric is the principal and CEO of A Mind for All Seasons, is a nationally recognized speaker, a consultant and dementia expert, and a licensed assisted living administrator, and teaches about dementia at the college level. Eric is nationally, oh, there we go, that's twice. Eric passionately believes that lifelong learning is a key to finding powerful new solutions to significant changes, and has worked since 2000 to change lives through innovative dementia care techniques and leadership strategies. Prior to starting A Mind for All Seasons, Eric worked in traditional assisted living as a program director and executive director for 9 years, then spent almost 7 years as the executive director of a memory care community where he developed innovative approaches to person-centered care that made significant differences in how persons living with dementia experience the world. Eric has served on the board of the Idaho Healthcare Association and currently chairs the Education Committee. He previously served as a board member and chairman of Alzheimer's Idaho, a 501c3 nonprofit. So welcome, Eric. We're so happy to have you with us today. I am going to stop sharing and let you share your screen now.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with all of you. And I'm excited to share this topic. It's in a way, it's a little bit of a provocative topic because it says the word treatment of dementia. And technically, there's not any accepted treatment that's universally accepted. So some of what I want to share as far as treatment ideas are possibilities, but there are also things that I believe strongly in because of research that we're doing at A Mind for All Seasons and the 500 plus treatment summaries we've written in the last couple of years and the data that we've gained from doing that. We've done a lot of work in a lot of different contexts and have come to understand a lot of things that I'm excited to share with you today. One thing I will say related to the topic as well is that most really top researchers in the dementia space recognize that a very significant number, even I dare say most cases of Alzheimer's disease could be prevented with the right kinds of early intervention. So I hope that you learned some really important things today that can help you protect your own brain and maybe help with people that you're serving as well. So with that, let's dive into a consideration of how we treat aging in general. This picture is a hill at an angle. And if you think about how we talk about aging, so often we say things like, well, you're over the hill. And we try to be a little bit more sensitive about it these days than maybe we were when I was a little kid and went to the card aisle at the grocery store and looked at cards, but we're not that much different. We still talk about things like brain farts and senior moments. And at some point, it seems like we cross over this magical threshold and somehow we're on the other side of the hill, whatever that means. I've never figured out exactly when that threshold is, But when we're young and we go to the doctor and we have complaints of certain things, the doctor says, oh my gosh, that's no good. Let's run some tests. Let's figure out what's going on and get you feeling better. And in my experience, so many older adults go to their doctor and at some point they complain about something and they hear things along the lines of, well, you are getting older, you know. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's acceptable. I don't think it's okay to quit trying to improve quality of life and figure things out. I do think that we're all mortal. I think the number one cause of death is birth. It's going to happen. It's part of our journey, and that's okay. And we should be actually talking about it openly. But I do think that we can do some things to consider the trajectory of aging and what we might do to influence it. When we talk about the trajectory of aging, there's this idea that at some point when we cross over the hilltop, we're on a glide slope down to the finish line. And there's this sort of unwritten rule that for some people, it's going to be a long, fairly slow glide into the 90s or maybe being a centenarian. And for other people, the decline could be a little bit steeper. And for some people, it's kind of like the engine's on fire and we are headed straight to the ground and you cross over 65 or 70 and it's bad news. I don't think that it needs to be that way. If we take a step back and we start asking ourselves, what causes these kinds of decline? I had a very interesting conversation a few days ago with a friend of mine who's a family practice doctor with St. Luke's. And he was talking about going to a conference with an endocrinologist who spent 2 hours, and he was supposed to talk about 95 slides, but he only put one slide up on the screen and he spent the entire 2 hours talking about that slide. And my friend said it was one of the best presentations he's ever heard. The slide was a picture of a tree with roots and a trunk and then all sorts of branches. We've all seen trees, but up in those branches were words describing different chronic health conditions that people tend to live with for a long time. Things like heart disease and type 2 diabetes and obesity and Alzheimer's disease. And this endocrinologist pointed out at this medical conference that all of those diseases up in the branches have the same root cause kinds of factors. There are certain genetic tendencies that really get turned on by insulin resistance, which he compared to like the trunk of that tree. When we understand what is in the roots and what's coming up the trunk, we can start to alter things that are in the branches. So let's consider a few sobering statistics. 1 in 9 adults 45 and older has some kind of decline in cognitive functioning, and that's only the people that are willing to report it. I dare say the number might be a little bit higher because I talk to a lot of people in their 40s and 50s that complain of some brain fog, some sort of decline. 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, and currently more than 6 million people in this country are living with Alzheimer's, and worldwide it's more than 50 million. We're talking a lot of people who have what doctors call diabetes of the brain or type 3 diabetes. So this is what the Alzheimer's brain looks like. And compared to a healthy brain, you see massive devastation. We're talking a brain that loses 50 to 70% of its mass by the end stages of the disease, and lots of damage throughout the brain. This is not just a disease of memory. This is a disease that is a form of brain death. So we're going to see wholesale destruction and changes in most areas of functioning. You'll see a decline in not only memory, but speech and language processing, and our ability to be oriented to person, place, and time, and our ability to work with numbers and plan tasks, and our personality, and on and on and on. You can't lose half or more of your brain and not have some really serious effects. But one of the interesting facts that we've learned in the last couple of decades is that the area of the brain that tends to be ground zero for Alzheimer's disease, an area, if you can see my cursor here, that on the healthy side has a lot of healthy tissue right here, just above the brain stem, kind of in the middle of the brain, called the hippocampus. That area is like the memory center of the brain. And we learned in the last couple of decades that it produces new brain cells all the time. Most researchers say somewhere between 700 and 1,400 new brain cells a day. So how on earth do you get to the point that on the disease side, it looks like a great big crater over here, and we've lost all that healthy tissue? Well, to help you understand it, let's talk about our bones. Healthy bone is what happens when the rate of bone breakdown and the rate of bone formation are in equilibrium. Everybody knows that if you break a bone, you can grow new bone. And most people realize that you also break down bone cells every day. And if you didn't, you would be in trouble, because everybody would look like Andre the Giant or something. It would be a problem. So healthy bones have that equilibrium. But what happens if, let's say you go through surgical or natural menopause as a woman, and you live for a long time without sufficient estrogen levels? There are estrogen receptors on bone cells. And when you live for a long time without enough estrogen, you upset the balance and you start losing bone cells faster than they're being formed. That means you get brittle bones. Well, when it comes to the brain, a similar thing happens. You start losing brain cells faster than they're being formed, and you start losing synaptic connections faster than we can make them. And so Alzheimer's might be kind of a synaptoporosis, if you will. When you consider the typical experience of the aging adult, there are some devastating things to think about. Consider, for example, what it would be like if you went to the doctor. Let's say you're female and you go to the doctor and the doctor says, I have some bad news. You have breast cancer. I've done a biopsy. I think it's stage 1. And you might have some pain, so I want you to take some Tylenol. And we'll keep an eye on it. Why don't you come back in a year or two and we'll see if it's any worse. If you notice anything real dramatic, let me know, but we'll keep an eye on that. Totally unacceptable, right? That doctor would be sued for malpractice. But when someone has cognitive decline and they or their loved ones take them to the doctor, at first, when it's just subjective cognitive decline, which, by the way, in 80% of cases, it ends up being a real problem. But when it's just subjective, people go to the doctor and say, I'm noticing some things that aren't quite me. I'm worried about it. And maybe the physician does a little pencil and paper test. And if they do that and don't find that they meet the criteria for dementia or mild cognitive impairment, then a lot of times the provider might say something like, I think you're normal. You're slowing down a little bit. You are getting a little bit older, but we'll see how things go. And then things get a little bit worse. And then pretty soon you find yourself with a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, which doesn't sound that bad because it uses the term mild. But mild cognitive impairment actually refers to the degree to which it interrupts your activities of daily living. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want even mild interruption in my ability to toilet myself, or my ability to bathe myself, or my ability to dress myself. I want 100% control over those things. So it's actually evidence of major deterioration by the time it qualifies for a mild cognitive impairment diagnosis. We now know that Alzheimer's is at work for 10 to 20 years before symptoms even show up. By the time that they do, we're really far down the road. And by the time someone then qualifies for an Alzheimer's diagnosis, it's kind of like stage 4 cancer. And yet we look at that situation with Alzheimer's and we say, well, there's nothing we can do. I literally just in the last week had some clients that went off to the Mayo Clinic. We were just starting to work with them. They were starting to get excited that there were some things they could be doing to improve their health. And they went and they did a hell week of testing at the Mayo Clinic. And they came out 100% convinced because there was an Alzheimer's diagnosis, there wasn't a darn thing that they could do. And they were basically told, hey, thanks for coming and spending all this money and time and putting the effort through. You need to go home and write out your will and basically just sit around and wait for the end to happen. That's not okay. I'm not okay with that. I think we need to do everything that we can. But what we do know is that there's not going to be a pharmaceutical intervention, at least not anytime soon. Companies like Pfizer, notably, just a few years ago, have backed out of Alzheimer's research altogether. And part of that is because they realize that There have been over 400 drug trials, and not one of them is a cure for Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia for that matter. So that leaves people wondering, well, when am I going to hit the bottom of the slide? What slide am I on? What slide are you on? Is there anything that could be done to change this trajectory? If I am already sliding down, are there options that I have? Well, some people say that there are. Dale Bredesen is a neurologist that spent most of his career at UCLA. He was the founding president of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. And not too long ago, he said Alzheimer's should be as rare as leprosy or polio. I don't know about you, but I've never met a leper. That's a pretty bold statement. This physician, Dr. Richard Isaacson, started the country's first Alzheimer's prevention clinic at Weill Cornell University. They have multiple locations now. And basically what they do is a lot of testing. They do neurological evaluation. They look at labs and root cause factors that lead to cognitive decline. And they help people with lifestyle kinds of interventions. They do great work in the preventive space. What about other evidence that maybe there's something that you could do? Let me tell you about an actual case study that I'm directly involved in. I'm going to share some of the research that we do here at Mind for All Seasons and some of the people that we actually work with. So this is the CNS Vital Signs Cognitive Test. It's a neurocognitive workup, kind of like a visit to the neuropsychologist's office, except we can do it online. It's academically verified, but it only takes 45 minutes to an hour instead of 4 to 6 hours. So when someone takes this test, we look at all sorts of different aspects of their cognitive functioning. And you can see those domains here on the left. Well, this man is 62 years old, and he has a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's disease, which means he developed the disease prior to age 65. He's had a diagnosis for a couple of years, and earlier in life, he literally tested as a genius. Some people jokingly say, I'm a genius, or he is such a genius. This guy actually was a bona fide genius. But when you look at his scores, most of his scores fall underneath the 24th percentile. He is not functioning like a genius anymore. And by looking at root cause issues and doing a very broad panel of blood work and looking at many different contributors in concert and doing something about all of them together, we were able to see his scores go from what you see on the screen to these within just a few months. And that's not an isolated case. I've seen that over and over and over with people. This guy's getting more of his life back. His goal is to go do a mission trip for his church in about a year. He has hope again. He's doing things differently, and he's getting different results. And so now he's starting to plan for the future again. I think that that's exciting. And I want to spend the rest of our time talking about some of the research that's led up to this and what exactly we did for this guy and what other contexts we're doing that in, so that you have a sense of kind of the current state of where people are with this and what different researchers are looking at. I think we can all agree, though, that when it comes to Alzheimer's and other types of dementia, it's time for a new approach. The whole idea of just categorizing your decline and just sitting back and watching it as if we're watching the planes fall out of the sky is not fair to anybody. If it's cancer, we go after it like crazy. We throw everything but the kitchen sink at it. And if somebody has a rare form of cancer and there's an experimental treatment and we don't even know if it works, but it might, and the science is pretty good, that's when the oncologist says, hey, you got a terminal situation. You got nothing to lose here. Let's try this. And some people choose not to, and I understand and respect that. But many people say, I have nothing to lose. Why not try this? Alzheimer's disease is a terminal condition. Many types of dementia also have complications that lead to an earlier death. Why don't we do more and fight harder to try things? Well, that's what we're doing here at Mind for All Seasons. So I mentioned Dale Bredesen earlier. I don't need to read his credentials to you, but I will tell you that He spent about 30 years trying to develop a drug for Alzheimer's disease. And along the way, he realized there are reasons why you couldn't make a drug for Alzheimer's disease. For one thing, the drug would have to do this much stuff. You can't make a drug that does that much stuff. It's kind of like trying to patch a hole in a roof that has a lot of different holes and expecting the roof to stop leaking. Or imagine that you're in a boat and you got 20 holes in the hull of the boat and you only patch one, and you wonder why the boat is still sinking. I believe we have grown complacent in research. We've put a lot of emphasis on the single variable, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. And so we know a lot of things that relate to brain health and influence brain health, but when they're tested against placebo, not one of them is a cure for Alzheimer's disease. And most of them don't significantly alter the trajectory. You could make a case for things like physical activity. That's a big time mitigating factor. If you're physically active throughout your life, there's a lot of goodness that comes from that reduces your dementia risk. And when someone is living with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, being physically active really does make a difference. But when you look at other things like magnesium, we know is essential for brain health and heart health. It's a nutrient metal. The brain and the heart are both electrically active organs, and we need some magnesium for them to work properly. Well, if you test magnesium against a placebo in a double-blinded study, it doesn't make that big of a difference. If anything, there's really no measurable impact. It's kind of like patching one hole and expecting the roof to quit leaking. But what if we learned something different? What if we had a different view? I'm going to illustrate a different perspective by telling you a story. And it's a true story from several years ago. Valentine's Day was yesterday, and it happens to be my wife's birthday. A few years ago on her birthday, I took her to lunch at the Cheesecake Factory. And we got there early so we could get a good seat by the window, and we ordered salmon. She got one dish, I got a different dish, with the intention of splitting and sharing. And about 3 minutes after we placed our order, the server came back and she was shaking her head. And I knew what was coming out of her mouth before she spoke. We're out of salmon. And I thought, oh my gosh, you're going to have a rough Valentine's Day because it's not even noon and you're already out of salmon. She explained that their delivery truck had not shown up that morning. So rather than crying in our plates, we ordered something different. And halfway through lunch, I looked out the window and I said, honey, there's our salmon. The Ocean Beauty seafood truck was circling in the parking lot. And she said, well, could we send this back? I really wanted to have some salmon. And I said, honey, we can't. There is no salmon. They're not delivering. She said, what is going on? We watched for a little while as the truck just kept kind of driving around. It would sit parked and then it would drive around a little bit and it would come back and park. Finally, I got up and I investigated a little bit and I found that the bread delivery truck was parked in the loading area. Now, whether the loading dock is empty or the bread truck is blocking it, either way, there's no salmon in the restaurant. Can you imagine what would happen if the same was true for other delivery trucks? What if the vegetable truck didn't show up days on end? What if we went into the pantry at the Cheesecake Factory hoping to make some cheesecake and we found 2 eggs, half a cup of flour, a teaspoon of sugar, and no vanilla? You can't make a cheesecake with that. And what if I really wanted cheesecake and I'd been to the grocery store before showing up? And so I went out to the car and I got a flat of eggs and I brought it in and I said, hey, can you make me a cheesecake now? They would look at it and say, no, we need more ingredients than that. I might be able to make you some scrambled eggs. I might do some good from it, but I can't make you a cheesecake. That is essentially what goes on in our brains as we age and we don't attend to all the things that need to be in the pantry. And it's exactly why a double-blind placebo-controlled trial of one variable will probably never influence some of these chronic diseases that we're living with. They are multifactorial. We know of at least 50 different things that affect the brain when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. So Dr. Bredesen took a different approach in 2014. He said, what if we take 10 people and do a little pilot trial? And what we'll do is measure the holes in the roof. We'll do an extensive panel of blood work, way more than you ever get done in a standard physical. And we'll look at nutrients, we'll look at hormones, we'll look at inflammatory markers, we'll look at flags for things that would be toxic to the brain, things like mercury and lead. Everybody knows that lead is a problem. There's a reason we got past lead-based paints long ago. And mercury, well, if you've ever heard of Mad Hatter's disease, you know, it's not a good thing for the brain. And haberdashers, hat makers, years ago had all kinds of problems because mercury was used in the hat making process. We could add to the list herbicides and pesticides and plastics. Anyway, Dr. Bredesen looked at all sorts of different potential holes in the roof for 10 people. He also did baseline cognitive testing. Some of the patients had MRIs where they actually measured the size of structures in the brain. And then he developed very personalized plans for each one of those 10 people. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It wasn't algorithmic. It was, where are the holes in your roof and what do we need to do to patch them? So it was nutrient supplements, it was dietary changes, it was physical activity, it was overcoming issues with sleep or sleep apnea challenges. It was doing different types of meditative exercises. It was dealing with hormonal deficiencies. All of those things mattered, but they looked a little different from one person to the next. And in the end, 9 out of 10 people had phenomenal results. For example, one of the people in that pilot trial was a 66-year-old man with progressive complaints of cognitive issues. And he had a genetic tendency that elevates Alzheimer's risk. He had a family history of Alzheimer's. A PET scan was consistent with Alzheimer's. An MRI showed that the memory center of his brain, his hippocampi, were in the 17th percentile. But after 10 months of intervention with a multimodal kind of approach, the hippocampus measured in the 75th percentile. And the radiologist that read the report said, there's no way this is true. I must have mixed up the paperwork. And when they realized they hadn't, they sent it off to another research institution that used a different computer program to look at the MRI and recognized, oh, we think that it started in the 10th percentile and it wound up in the 90th percentile. Either way, regardless of whether we're talking the 17th to the 75th or the 10th to the 90th, this guy got a lot of his brain back. And functionally, not only was he doing better, but by the time Dr. Bredesen came to Sun Valley, the St. Luke's Health System brought him to speak to the Wood River Foundation in Sun Valley in 2018. So 4 years after this pilot trial was published, Dr. Bredesen talked about this patient, and he was still doing really well and making little gains here and there. He had not declined in spite of his early diagnosis. That's remarkable. So meanwhile, as all this was going on, Randy Vawadri, who in full disclosure is now the medical director of A Mind for All Seasons, and who had owned urgent cares and a primary care practice and a mental health practice and a med spa in Pocatello, was also doing psychotropic drug reviews for the Idaho State Veterans Home. So he was chair of the committee that would come together and look at these sweet men and women who had served our country and now had such challenging behavioral expressions that people were looking at using antipsychotic medication with them. And Randy had a pharmacist friend that brought him Dr. Bredesen's initial 2014 study. And Randy read it and he went, wait a minute. He was doing hormone replacement in elderly people? I guess that makes sense. After all, things like progesterone bind to GABA receptors in the brain, and those are the same receptors that certain antipsychotics that are meant to calm you down bind to. That's why they have a calming effect. But progesterone might not have all the nasty side effects of some of those drugs that come with a black box warning that you should never use them in elderly dementia patients because they can increase all-cause mortality. And so he thought, it's actually kind of a low risk. It's less risk to try doing some topical bioidentical hormone replacement and see how people do. Or he thought, gee, maybe some of these women that are sitting around and wrapped in blankets in the middle of the hot summer and complaining that they're cold and they're crying at the drop of a hat. Maybe they don't need antidepressants. Maybe what they need is some thyroid medication. And so he started looking deeper and ordering some labs and trying some things, and people started doing better. And so he started carrying that into his primary care practice. Well, Dr. Bredesen kept doing some work as well. He was trying to convince review boards that they needed to do a very large scale trial of this approach, doing a multimodal approach. And unfortunately, the review boards kept coming back and saying, Dr. Bredesen, you don't know how research is done. There are too many variables here. How are we going to know which one works? And his answer was, you don't know how Alzheimer's disease works. There's not just one variable that causes it. There are many variables, and we can do multivariate analysis. We have computers, for crying out loud. So let's try this. And what matters is if people get better. And so he worked with a group of doctors to do a case report on 100 patients, hoping that that would be enough compelling information to convince people to do a broader trial that was IRB approved and had multiple study sites, and Dr. Bredesen was recused from it, so that we could prove that, yeah, this approach really has some merit. Well, they finally got approval to do that. And last year, in May, they published the results of that. They had 3 different study sites, and in spite of it being in the middle of COVID, they went forward with this little research study for 9 months. They tested a trial group that did no specific intervention. They had one group that was using a drug called donanemab, and another group that was doing this multimodal approach where you're measuring the holes in the roof and trying to patch as many as you can. Well, as expected, the control group that did no treatment declined an average of 3 points in 9 months. That's exactly what you expect in Alzheimer's patients. It's been verified over and over. On a 30-point cognitive test, you're going to lose 3 points every 9 to 12 months. That doesn't give you very long to go on a 30-point test. The people that took donanemab declined an average of 2 points on that 30-point test in 9 months. So they actually did better. You could say, wow, that's significant. The drug made some improvement for some people. They didn't decline as fast. Well, if you're declining, I don't know, if I'm on board a plane that's crashing, I'm not sure if I want it to go fast or slow. There's part of me that says, I don't think I want to drag that out any. But what if you could actually get the engine firing enough again that you could kind of stay airborne long enough to have a good landing and to have some quality? That's what happened with 84% of the patients who showed an average gain of 5 points on a 30-point test in 9 months. That's phenomenal. And 3 of the study participants went from Montreal cognitive scores of 18 out of 30 up to 30 out of 30 in that 9-month trial period. It was remarkable. It's also not surprising to me because we've written over 500 treatment summaries in the last couple of years, and our data is the same. We don't see everybody improve dramatically, but we've seen people go from 15 out of 30 to 30 out of 30. We've seen people go from 15 out of 30 to 26 out of 30 in 5 to 9 months. So when Dr. Bredesen started doing training for providers, Randy said, well, I'm already doing this. I've already dug through all of his footnotes. I've already read his research, and I'm going to go off and train directly. So Randy was one of the first providers to do that. And since then, we've studied the works of many other doctors that are looking at multimodal approaches. Dr. Bredesen is one, but Dr. Mark Gordon is a neuroendocrinologist that specializes in brain injury. He's worked with soldiers for 30 years. He figured out that when people have had a brain injury, often the reason that they get PTSD or they're suicidal or they have an eating disorder or a sleeping disorder or other serious issues is that the brain has compressed on itself, damaged the pituitary gland, goofed up signaling for about 35 neurologically active hormones, and ignited a chronic inflammatory response. And not only does that make you about 50% more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease, but it means that you have a crappy life for years because you can't sleep well, or you've got an eating disorder, or you're battling depression for years. We've learned that many people have had brain injuries and they don't even know it. You could be sitting in a car at a stoplight and rear-ended at 10 miles an hour and have what you think is a somewhat mild case of whiplash. And a few months down the road, you start having some mental health challenges. When we do lab work with those patients, what we find is that their pituitary gland is not signaling accurately, and some of their hormones are completely messed up. I saw a young man just yesterday who is a high school student, and he's got serious cognitive deficits to the point he can't really function on his own. There's no way when he graduates that he's going to be able to go out into the world on his own. And every one of his major neurologically active hormones are completely in the toilet. He had testosterone levels that were so low, I don't know that I've ever seen them that low. And the master hormone for his brain, pregnenolone, should be between 150 and 210, and it registered at 10. When we take people in those situations and we patch those holes in the roof, they do better over and over and over. And so when people says there's nothing you can do for Alzheimer's, there's nothing you could do for dementia, there's nothing you can do for mental health other than counseling and medication that treats the symptoms, but you're going to battle this most of your life probably, I beg to differ. And I shared this slide because it's so complicated and busy. And I don't care if anyone knows anything about what's on it, the details. I just want you to look at it and say, oh my gosh, there may not be a cure, but there is a whole lot of stuff that we can do. And if we realize that Alzheimer's and a lot of other types of dementia start decades before symptoms show up, then the most important thing that any of us can do to protect our health and change the trajectory that we're aging at is to get our blood work done early, figure out all the things that are causing the trajectory to be what it is, and take steps to change that. Now, there are other internal challenges that show up outwardly. When we're talking about people already living with dementia or even people without, pain shows up behaviorally. People stay home. They don't go out as much. They don't do as much when they hurt. People living with Alzheimer's disease might become aggressive. They might even be a little bit violent if they're in terrible pain. Poor circulation is going to affect things. People are more likely to fall, for one thing. They're more likely to have pain issues related to poor circulation as well. Neurotransmitter deficiencies show up as mental health kinds of challenges or brain fog. If you don't have enough oxygen, it's a problem. Everybody knows if someone puts their hands around your neck and they squeeze, you're going to be in trouble. And yet at night, many people have undiagnosed sleep apnea. Some people are thin and they don't realize that there's a type of sleep apnea where your brain forgets to tell your body to breathe. It's called central sleep apnea instead of obstructive sleep apnea. Well, if you've got a problem like that and it's undiagnosed and you spend all night for years without enough oxygen, not only are you waking up exhausted and you feel like you're dragging through your day and you're foggy as all get out, but it's going to elevate your risk dramatically for cognitive decline down the road. And it's totally treatable. So what do we do about that? Well, we've got an overnight oximetry device that we use with people. It's super simple and is part of our process and part of what you could do at a doctor's office. You go home and you wear the device at night. It's a little fingertip probe. It's a good screening tool. And if there's a more serious problem, you do a sleep study and you get things fixed. Inflammation and exhaustion also lead to issues. When Randy and I started working together and we kind of merged our ideas, our processes, and our approach, and we created the enhanced protocol at A Mind for All Seasons, and we started doing more and more work with as many people as we could in as many settings as we could, we found that some people were in the 84% that Dr. Bredesen's study found. Some people got remarkably better in relatively short amounts of time. And some people were just stable. They didn't decline, but they really didn't get better. And that was unnerving. When you see some people that get a lot better and other people that hardly change, even though not declining in the context of dementia is a win, it doesn't feel like a win. And so Randy and I started digging into these other types of issues and saying, well, what else could we do that would influence people? There's kind of a floor effect. Imagine that cognitive health is represented by a skyscraper. And if life is really good from a cognitive perspective, you're on the 20th floor and your view is awesome. You can see forever. And as things decline, you're coming down the elevator and you're still above ground. You're not as high up in your perspective and capacity as you were, but you're still above ground. But boy, when you hit ground level, that represents things starting to be a problem and diagnosable. And the further you go into the basement, the longer it takes before you can get back up to ground level and really notice some positive changes. And so we started saying, what else could we do that would help people move up faster to ground level? Well, if we can improve their circulation, if we can improve their oxygenation, if we can get neurotransmitters working more effectively, if we can calm the inflammatory response and help people have more energy, they would probably get up to ground level and start making gains faster. And so we started buying medical devices, many of which have been around for decades, and they do really amazing things for the body. But unfortunately, most of them are used by professional athletes in training facilities. Some of them get used at chiropractors' offices, but very rarely do they get used with elderly patients living with dementia. So we started getting medical devices and taking them to people. And lo and behold, some of our clients who were sort of not declining, but not getting a lot better, started making improvements. So I'll tell you about a few of these devices. It's kind of like you can have a gym for the brain. One device uses a technique called pulsed electromagnetic fields. And it's based on some NASA research that was done when astronauts first started going into space and they were coming back sick because blood does not circulate the way that it does on Earth when you're in zero gravity. So astronauts were coming back with muscle wasting and bone loss and other problems. And NASA realized if you use pulses of the right frequency of electromagnetic energy, it stimulates what's called vasomotion. Our circulatory system that moves our blood through the body depends not only on the heart, but it depends on the capillaries expanding and contracting and squeezing blood through the body. About 75% of our blood goes into our capillaries at any time. And so we've got veins and arteries that are like trunks and branches of a tree, but 75% of the blood is out in the little tiny leaves and stems, the capillaries. It's like what's in your fingertip. And those capillaries have to engage in vasomotion. They expand and contract. It was found that when you improve vasomotion and you boost blood flow, bones heal faster because it stimulates bone cell production. So they actually heal in about half the time. Wounds heal faster. Pain is improved. Many people don't hurt nearly as much. And even depression responds for a lot of people. So the FDA said, yeah, this is safe. We should do this. Well, here is before and after an 8-minute treatment with a pulsed electromagnetic field device. This was shot into the patient's colon. And so you're just seeing some little capillaries and the blood moving through it. And at first, it's for those of you on the Zoom webinar from Idaho, it's like Eagle Road at 5 o'clock. And then all of a sudden the traffic breaks loose and it starts moving. It's amazing what happens when that occurs. So we got a PEMF device and started using it. Well, what else could you do? Well, we all know about photosynthesis and the way that sunlight uses plants and they work together to produce energy. But what about photosynthesis in the body? Well, the sun hits the skin and turns cholesterol into vitamin D. That's, I think, arguably a type of photosynthesis. And we use certain wavelengths of light to help babies that are jaundiced because blue wavelengths of light help the liver better process bilirubin. So the body responds to light that way. This is a light box that Randy's mother uses for her psoriatic arthritis, and she does a lot better with those wavelengths of light. So that's been around for a while. In fact, a lot of light therapies have been around for a while. This is Dr. Michael Hamblin, who is now retired, but he was the founder of the Wellman Center for Photomedicine at a little school you may have heard of called Harvard. Harvard Medical School has had a department of photomedicine within the dermatology school for quite some time. And they've got a lot of doctors that research how wavelengths of light affect the body in specific ways. Well, what are the ways that they do it? Before I tell you this case study, I'll just explain that specific wavelengths of red and near infrared light stimulate energy production in the body. I'm not going to get into the science of it, but it affects what's called the electron transport chain. It stimulates the last enzyme in that chain. These wavelengths of light are highly anti-inflammatory. They're very good at stimulating energy production. They stimulate blood flow. They stimulate antioxidant production. And they are completely 100% safe because these wavelengths of light are in sunlight, but they're not wavelengths like UV light that could burn you. So you can have a lot of exposure to red and near infrared light, not have any problems. And cadaver studies with skulls have shown that a certain percentage of that light actually penetrates the skull and would get to the brain. Now, cue this case study. There was a Brigham Young University football player, famous player, Larry Carr, and he started having symptoms of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. He was getting brain foggy. He had a real challenging relationship with his wife, which was totally out of character for him. But he was snapping at her. He was rude. He was feeling stressed. He was depressed. And so he thought that he would try to make things better by going on a church service mission for his church. So he and his wife went off to Boston. And instead of doing better by getting outside themselves and giving to others, he just got worse because of the stress. And fortunately, someone in the Boston area said, hey, you should enroll in the pilot trial at the Boston Veterans Administration in a new study with soldiers who have been through concussive injuries. And you have been through concussive injuries. So why don't you enroll in this pilot trial using red and near infrared light? So he did. And a newspaper article pointed out that an MRI before showed all sorts of dark spots where the brain was not lighting up, it was not working. And afterward, it was a noticeable difference. And functionally, he got his life back. But as part of the trial, he had to quit using the red light helmet that he was using there for a period of time. It was supposed to be something like 6 to 8 weeks. And after 2 weeks, Dr. Nazer, who was leading the study, talked to Larry and found that he was doing so much worse. She said, okay, that's enough of the washout period. We know it works for you. I'm not going to make you suffer for the next few weeks. You need to go back to these treatments. They're working for you. So he did. This is the kind of device that he was using, made by Thor Photomedicine, which is a leading company. They make a lot of tools for the dental industry that use red and low-level laser therapies to treat things like gum disease. Well, this light helmet had such impressive results in the pilot trials that on average, the participants gained 2 standard deviations on their cognitive tests. That's like going from a C to an A. It was phenomenal. And their symptoms of PTSD cleared up, their depression cleared, suicidality scores diminished dramatically. They had a lot of improvement. And so Randy and I found out about this and went, we need to get one of those. So we have one in our office. We also have a full body red bed. This is not it, but this is a full body red light application like the US track team and US swim team use. The one that we have is actually the same that the San Francisco 49ers use in their training facility because it's really good at calming inflammation. Alzheimer's and other dementias are a pro-inflammatory condition. And so we use that. And these are FDA registered devices. Audiovisual entrainment is a technique that's been around since about the 1940s. Radar operators were falling asleep at the radar screen. And so the Army researched that and they realized that it was because the flashes of the radar were going by at about a delta wave frequency. That's the same frequency that brain waves slow down to when we're falling asleep. And that was the beginning of understanding that if you're subjected to regular pulses of light, and they later found sound, that your brain will keep pace with that, which means you can manipulate it. You could speed it up or slow it down. Well, many people with advanced Alzheimer's disease get agitated late in the day. You could use a device like this to help calm them down even before things get ramped up. That's exactly what we do. We have partners in assisted living facilities that have called this device magical because it calms people so much that they don't need to use antipsychotic medication. We have clients that are trying to prevent dementia who haven't been able to sleep for 20 years because of a brain injury and the fallout from all that. Their brains have forgotten how to fall asleep. And so we send them home with a device like this, and they put it on a sleep setting. In fact, just last night, my wife was having a hard time sleeping. And so she got out our AVE device and she put it on, and it calmed her brain right down. She went right to sleep. It's very helpful when you can retrain the brain how to do some of the things that it needs to do. I made a point of talking about sleep apnea and the loss of oxygen. There are a lot of other conditions that can cause you to not have as much oxygen as you should. And using an exercise with oxygen technique, we can get about 30% more oxygen up to the brain. Sauna is powerfully helpful. In fact, countries that sauna have a much lower rate of Alzheimer's disease. There's a study in Finland that showed a 66% lower rate of Alzheimer's in men who used sauna 4 to 5 times a week. Well, what happens when you take a younger person that has early onset Alzheimer's disease that normally would be really aggressive? In most cases, it would progress fairly rapidly, often more rapidly than if you're 85 developing Alzheimer's disease. Let me introduce you to Dave and Deb. We have permission to talk about them and to share their story. And Dave was the executive vice president of one of the country's largest commercial insurance companies. And he was forced into an early retirement because of early onset Alzheimer's disease. He went to the Mayo Clinic and had a thorough workup, and they said, "I'm so sorry, you have early onset Alzheimer's. There's not a darn thing that we can do." He was in his late 50s. It was devastating, absolutely devastating. But he has a neighbor who runs an assisted living community that uses our protocol. They were one of the key locations that we've experimented with this stuff. And so the neighbor said, "You should call Mind for All Seasons." So they did. And we did a broad panel of labs. We did baseline cognitive testing. We did all sorts of other tests. We found that he was very deficient in certain hormones and nutrients. He had inflammatory markers off the charts. Ultimately, we found that living next to an orange grove that they sprayed all the time was a bad thing because his body was clear full of pesticides. And he was an athlete for many years. He was a PE major in school, and he'd stayed very active. This guy looks the picture of health. He can bench press more than anybody his age that I know. And he's training for a marathon right now. So he's physically very robust, but he's had a lot of brain injuries. And so when we looked into his hormonal signaling, it was a disaster. So we've worked on all of those things. This is an interview that was done about 9 months after he started the process. He's now been at it almost 3 years. And I can tell you that he drives himself all over Phoenix now. I had a 25-minute conversation with him about a week ago, and he didn't repeat himself once in that conversation. And his wife wasn't there. She was off at a piano lesson. And we had what felt like a very normal conversation. So much so that when the disability examiner from Medicare called him, the disability examiner said, "I need to warn you that you should not perjure yourself. Like it's a felony to claim that you have a disability when you don't." They had to spend a couple of months jumping through hoops with the Mayo Clinic, sending all of his diagnostic information because the examiner thought that he was faking it because he was doing so much better. So here's what he has to say about this process. What kinds of changes have you both noticed as this has gone on? Maybe Dave, we could start with what you've noticed in yourself and how you have felt about participating in the enhanced protocol. And then Deb, let's get some feedback from you as well.
Okay. I'm stronger. I'm not going to say, you know, I'm lifting weights stronger, but physically I can see better, I can hear better, and I can express myself much better verbally.
I was a little bit skeptical because this has been a death sentence. I mean, even now, people hear and they send me little crying emojis. We're so sorry about your husband. I'm like, because you don't know what you're talking about. But so I was skeptical. And every week, Eric would call us and say, how's it going? I'm like, it's not. This is not happening. All we're doing is not eating sugar. And I just don't see the incremental growth. But when you live with someone 24/7, it's hard to see that. But all of a sudden, in the last month or two, I've got my husband back. And his sense of humor, his sarcasm, which actually was a nice vacation, not having that for a while, but he's back. And we're not out of the woods. I don't want to pretend that everything's wonderful, but he is back and we engage in conversation and he plays with the grandkids and it's been remarkable. And it was like just turned on like a couple of months ago. Both these neurologists before, I mean, Mayo Clinic, you can't get better than Mayo Clinic, but it was like a Band-Aid. Here, do you want the Cinderella Band-Aid or the Batman Band-Aid? Because that's all we have. And it wasn't, nothing to do with diet or stress level. Dave's stress level was off the charts. You guys just went through every nook and cranny of his health and life and sleep and stress level, and it's made a gigantic difference. Why? And it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense.
What? So as we wrap up, I'm going to leave you with just one more case history, and if you have any questions as we wrap up, I'm happy to address that. But we had a 55-year-old woman come in. She was forced to quit her job. She was teaching at one of the local high schools here in the Boise area. She had a rapid onset of dementia symptoms. She literally went from successfully teaching her class 1 week to a week later struggling to use the spreadsheets that she used and not remembering her students' names. And then a week after that, she could hardly even walk. Her balance was all goofed up and she couldn't put her words together. When I first met her in December of 2019, she sat in my office with her husband and I would ask a question. And here I'm looking at this woman that's not that much older than I am. And I would ask a question and she would try to answer and she'd turn to her husband and say, you have to, I can't say it, can't find my words. And we did all the same kind of process, but we found different root causes for her. And as we worked through this, and this is a woman that not only was diagnosed here in Boise by a neurologist, but she also went off to Stanford for advanced testing because her husband's like, we are not going to sit back and just take this. We've got to do something to get life back on track. And they didn't have any answers except, oh, on top of early onset Alzheimer's, you also have posterior cortical atrophy where the back of the brain is deteriorating and is affecting your vision. Well, we went through this multimodal process, and this is an interview, a little segment of an interview with her family. I love what her daughter says about this.
A year ago, it was like we got the diagnosis, and for my sister and I, it was just gut-wrenching because you thought you lost your mom. It was really hard for us to accept that and be told that there was nothing that they could do. So when our friends told us about this place and that what you were doing, like, it was the only option, and it was hands down the best decision that could have been made because she has come tenfold from where she was just in October. She's able to function, to talk, enjoy her grandkids, be a person again, and be independent, where she wasn't able to do that in October. It's incredible, and I can't wait to see where she is years from now. Like, I got my mom back, and it was quick.
Now, I wish I could say that everybody gets their mom back or that this is some kind of a cure. It's not. And the further along people are, the harder it gets. There's a lady up in Richland, Washington, in an assisted living facility that uses our process. And we've done a lot of blood work with her. And she's got a lot of deficiencies. She's 100 years old. You can imagine the kinds of deficiencies that she has. She's had dementia for a long time. Her family said, you know, at 100, we're not going to do anything heroic here, but we're just going to use these medical devices. Now, even doing that, it has allowed her to go from being a mechanical lift transfer for 10 years, where it took 2 people and a Hoyer lift to move her in and out of bed, to now she's able to walk 75 feet with a walker and a 1-person assist. So the staffing is better. She's functioning better. She's happier. And she's not doing all these other interventions. And that's okay. But think of the impact on her dignity, on her quality of life, even on just things like her bowel functioning. The fact that she's up moving around and not lying down constantly even helps the plumbing work better in our bodies. There's so much more that we could talk about, so much more research that's being done in a practical way. Our job is to go out and study the very best of what the top researchers in the world are doing and translate that into a practical process. If it's safe, if the risk of trying something is very low, and if the prospect of it having a benefit is scientifically sound, we're going to try it, because we're tired of sitting back and saying, well, there's nothing that we can do. To us, that's not good enough. We've only scratched the surface here, but I appreciate your attention. And if you have any questions as we wrap up here, I'd be glad to entertain anything. Thank you so much.
You're on mute, Dee.
No, my mouse was not cooperating. Thank you, Eric. What a wonderful, incredible presentation today. And for all that it's worth, I am happy to give my personal testimony to everything that Eric has just talked about. That, you know, with everything that's going on and feeling stressed and decline and having 2 parents with dementia that passed, I was a little freaked out when I noticed my mind was not doing as well as I thought it should be. And I am very pleased with the protocol. I find significant changes already in just the 1.5 months that I've been working with your team. And it is substantial. And you are doing amazing work. And I just am so thrilled that you're out there doing the work that you have been. You've been on the top of my list of expert providers since I met you, since I heard about you before I met you. So thank you, Eric, for all that you do, you and your business, and for gracing us with this great overview and presentation of the kinds of work that you're doing today.
You're welcome.
What questions?
Thank you for your kind words.
I was just gonna, it's kind of a question, kind of a comment. I was in another session today on a totally different topic, but we were talking about ageism and the fact that you know, where you started this conversation with this concept of at some point you get to be over the hill. And it is really refreshing to see a holistic approach to understanding opportunities for improvement. And I think we all know Alzheimer's isn't going to be a silver bullet, but I am fascinated by the various treatments that are being explored and the types of improvements that they are delivering. And I guess so that's my observation. My observation is we should never give up, right? We have to always be looking holistically for things we can make better, even if we can't make it go away. And so I guess the question I have for you, Eric, is this was very focused on, you know, kind of that early onset dementia, the aging population, because that's what Learn is. But can you give it, I mean, when should somebody come see you? I mean, is it a cognitive concern at any age? Is it where would you suggest somebody come see you, or someone like you who's taking this kind of holistic approach?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dara. One of the reasons why our company is called A Mind for All Seasons is that it's important to take care of the brain at every season of life, Right now, our youngest client is 9. She flipped off her bicycle going down a steep hill. She had a helmet on, but she landed on her face. And even without a helmet, you can rattle your brain around to the point that you damage the pituitary gland, you ignite an inflammatory response. And this poor, sweet little girl was not herself. She was no longer a straight A student. She was failing in some of her classes. She was irritated and angry with her parents. Things were not going well, and she was starting to develop symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder. And by intervening early and dealing with the inflammatory response and using some of these medical devices, doing very safe kinds of things that are research-based, but maybe not traditional and typical, she, in a matter of 2.5 months, is doing so much better that her parents asked me just a few days ago to put together a flyer that they can distribute at their school, because they said so many kids need this. The pediatrician that is a good friend of theirs that actually met me when one of my daughters was in the hospital, and we started talking about this. She said, I have a friend that you need to do this for. I'm going to refer them. And she did. She reached out recently and said, do you think you could help with my 8-year-old boy who has an attention deficit problem? Nobody else is doing this type of root cause functional medicine kind of approach with these kids. So it is never too early and it's never too late to try to make a difference for the brain. But the interventions could look very different from one person to the next because it's a personalized approach, and we have to look at the root causes and do something about it based on the best research that we have available.
Thanks.
Other comments, questions? You can put them in the chat or you can come off mute.
That's really nice comments to share with you, Eric, if you're not looking. I don't know if you're looking.
Yeah, I love Christine's comment. Christine is our chief memory coach, and she is a big part of the magic that happens at A Mind for All Seasons. We love what she does. And I love how she put it here. For us, it is not good enough to say there's nothing that can be done. I think that's very well said. That is not good enough. People are worth fighting for. And even if we don't have all the answers, boy, if we can make a difference, why would we not?
And even just improve their quality of life.
Absolutely.
That softer landing. I really liked that concept, right? Land a little softer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, live better for longer. Doggone it. We can keep people in so many cases out of assisted living facilities. Think of the impact. The average lifetime cost of caring for someone with Alzheimer's is like $350,000. And with current inflationary rates, it's probably a lot higher than that now. But a little bit of work up front can do so much to prevent massive drags on the overall healthcare system and on individual lives and families. We just have to do more, and we can do better.
Yep, we have to get out of the box. Our traditional allopathic medicine kind of leads us down one road, and there's lots of benefits to that, but there's options to look broader and at other factors as well. So
there is one more question that just came in. Eric, are any of Mind for All Seasons testing and treatments covered by insurance?
Yeah, great question. A lot of the lab work could be covered by insurance. Some of it is never covered by insurance. And early on, we tried to work with primary care providers to order whatever we could through insurance. And it ended up taking 2 or 3 months to get things ordered. And then sometimes they'd order the wrong thing. And then sometimes it would get run through insurance and people would be in the donut hole and they'd get a bill for like $2,000 and they'd be frustrated. And I can get the whole initial lab panel for an Alzheimer's patient done for about $800. And that's about as much as it would cost just for the labs that insurance never covers. And so once we figured out how to bring the costs down on a cash pay model, we quit jumping through those hoops so that we could be more efficient. So there is some expense to it, but it costs 3 months worth of treatment for someone with more advanced dementia, costs a lot less than 1 month of assisted living. So.
Other questions? All right, well, on that note, thank you so much, Eric, once again for being our presenter today, as well as a sponsor for Learn. We appreciate your support behind what we're doing, and a shout out to Oasis Senior Advisors as well. We just have to get Dee on the right screen here. Attendees will receive an email inviting them to join our mailing list. You do need to confirm your interest in our emails to receive the information about future community education. If not, you'll have to go online and look for it. Check your junk mail folder. If you don't see that in the next few days, you're always welcome to accept our subscription through the website as well. And some of the upcoming events that we have for this quarter are medication management next week with Dr. Louise G, as well as Mountain Care Pharmacy, benefits of palliative care, the art of long-term care planning, and living well with diabetes or chronic pain through the Area Agency on Aging. And soon we will have our spring quarter up and available for you to take a look at as well. So once again, I thank all of you for being with us today, and I hope to see you again on future Learn sessions. Eric, thanks so much. I'll see you soon.
Look forward to it.